Imagine a land where kings wore crowns, but never truly ruled, where nobles raised armies against their own emperors, and where betrayal was more common than loyalty. This is the story of medieval Germany, a world built on blood and Thrones. In today's video, we'll uncover the dramatic rise and fall of medieval Germany. From the birth of the Holy Roman Empire to the endless struggles for power. From emperors crowned by popes to knights who lived and died by the sword. And from betrayals that shattered kingdoms to the battles that decided the fate of Europe. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see how this chaotic land of bloodshed and crowns shaped the destiny of an entire continent. Let's begin. The story of medieval Germany does not begin with a single king, a single crown, or even a single country. Instead, it begins with fragments. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, Central Europe was left in ruins. The land that would one day be called Germany was not a nation, but a scattering of duchies, bishoprics, tribes, and city-states. Each piece spoke a different dialect, followed its own customs, and swore loyalty only to local lords. Unity was a dream, but division was reality. Traveling across this land was like stepping into a patchwork quilt of power. In one valley, you might find a duke commanding a stone fortress. In another, a bishop ruling from a cathedral. Further along, peasants swore loyalty to a knight who controlled nothing more than a single village. This was the foundation of medieval Germany, scattered, divided, and endlessly contested. Yet from this chaos, a new order began to rise. The early rulers of Germany were not emperors in shining palaces. They were warlords, tribal leaders, and pragmatic kings who knew that survival meant strength. The Saxons, the Franks, and the Bavarians each carved out territories, their power built on alliances of blood and steel. Among them, the Saxon dynasty would emerge as one of the most important. Henry the Fowler, a duke chosen by his peers in 919, became the first king of East Francia, a realm that would slowly transform into the German kingdom. Henry was no ceremonial monarch. He built his strength through fortresses, through alliances with nobles, and through campaigns against invading Magyars. His rule marked the beginning of a new vision, that the German lands could be more than scattered territories. They could be bound together under one crown. But unity came at a cost. Every ruler faced the same challenge: how to keep proud, stubborn nobles in line. The king's authority was fragile, balanced on promises, marriages, and fragile oaths. One broken alliance, one betrayal, and the kingdom could fracture again. Medieval Germany began not as a story of unity, but as a constant struggle to hold the pieces together. From the start, its history was defined by division, ambition, and blood, and the men who dared to call themselves kings had to fight every day to prove it. The dream of empire did not die with Rome. In the heart of Europe, German kings sought to wear more than a crown. They sought the mantle of the Caesars. It began with Otto I, known to history as Otto the Great. In the year 962, he marched into Italy, where the shadow of the old Roman world still lingered. In Rome itself, he was crowned by the Pope, draped in robes of authority, and hailed as Emperor of the Romans. This was not just a ceremony. It was a statement. The German king now claimed to be the heir of Rome's glory. The coronation was steeped in sacred tradition. The emperor knelt before the Pope, swore to protect the church, and was anointed with holy oil. The crown placed upon his head was not merely gold, it was divine approval. To the people, this ritual meant that God himself had chosen their ruler. To the emperor, it meant legitimacy in a world where power was always contested. But with the crown came ambition. Otto and his successors were not content to rule over the German lands alone. They dreamed of restoring the empire that had once stretched across Europe. Their gaze turned south, to the wealthy lands of Italy. Controlling Rome in the Pope meant controlling the very soul of Christendom. Every emperor sought it. Every emperor fought for it. Yet this ambition carried danger. German kings who rode into Italy often found themselves trapped in endless wars, struggling to command faraway lands, while their own nobles grew restless at home. The empire stretched wide, but its foundation was fragile. Still, the idea of the Holy Roman Empire gave Germany a place at the center of medieval Europe. It was no longer a loose kingdom. It was a realm with universal claims, a power blessed by God, and a throne that stood as the guardian of Christendom. The rise of the Holy Roman Empire was not just about politics or war. It was about identity. The Germans believed they carried the torch of Rome, that their emperors were chosen not just to rule, but to defend civilization itself. And so the empire rose grand, sacred, ambitious. But behind the crowns and coronations, cracks were already forming. Because no matter how holy the empire claimed to be, its throne was never secure. To understand medieval Germany, you must forget the idea of one strong king ruling from a single throne. The real power lay elsewhere, scattered across the land, inside stone fortresses guarded by swords and shields. This was the feudal system, a web of loyalties and obligations where land meant power, and power meant survival. At the top sat the emperor, crowned in splendor. But beneath him stretched a hierarchy of dukes, counts, bishops, and knights, each ruling their own domain like miniature kings. The emperor might carry the title of Holy Roman Emperor, but in reality, he was often just one lord among many. Local lords' dominance. Local lords controlled everything that truly mattered. They commanded private armies of knights, they collected taxes from peasants, and they built castles that loomed over the countryside. These castles were more than homes. They were fortresses of authority, symbols of dominance. A peasant living near a lord's castle knew who held real power. The emperor was a distant name, but the lord was a daily reality. He decided who could marry, who could own land, and who lived or died in times of war. For many nobles, loyalty to the emperor was a matter of convenience. If obeying the crown served their interests, they complied. If not, they rebelled. And with dozens of powerful nobles scattered across Germany, rebellion was never far away. Peasants under pressure beneath. The nobles were the peasants, the backbone of the medieval world. They worked the fields, harvested the crops, and kept the wheels of life turning. But their lives were defined by pressure, hardship, and servitude. Most peasants were serfs, bound to the land they tilled. They could not freely leave. They owed labor and taxes to their lord, and in return they received protection, if protection truly came. During wars, peasants were the first to suffer. Armies trampled their fields, castles demanded more taxes for defense, and hunger stalked the villages. The promise of safety under a lord often meant endless toil in exchange for survival. This was the reality of medieval Germany, a world where emperors wore crowns but struggled for control, while local lords ruled with iron fists, and peasants bore the weight of it all. The empire called itself holy, but for those who lived under its feudal order, it was often a life of hardship and blood. The crown of medieval Germany glittered with gold, but beneath the shine, it was dangerously fragile. Unlike the kings of France or England, the German emperor never ruled with absolute authority. His throne sat in the center of Europe, yet his reach often stopped at the castle walls of rebellious lords. This was the paradox of the Holy Roman Empire. The crown was sacred, the title majestic, but the power weak central power. Every emperor dreamed of uniting Germany under a strong hand. But dreams quickly collided with reality. To be crowned, a king needed the support of powerful nobles and bishops. Those same nobles expected rewards, lands, privileges, and independence. The emperor was bound by promises. even before the crown touched his head. And once crowned, he faced the impossible task of balancing endless demands. If he pushed too hard, the lords turned against him. If he gave too much, the throne lost its strength. Germany's political map was not one kingdom, but hundreds of little states. Each lord ruled as if he were a king. Each bishop defended his church's independence, and each prince guarded his own ambitions. The emperor stood at the top, but his empire was built on shaky ground, constant rivalries. Weakness at the center meant rivalry everywhere else. Great dynasties, Saxons, Franconians, Hohenstaufens fought for dominance. Every time one family rose, another plotted to bring it down. The election of kings itself was a battlefield. Unlike in France, where crowns passed by blood, German kings were chosen by powerful electors. This gave nobles extraordinary leverage. They could decide who wore the crown and demand concessions in exchange for their vote. The result was a kingdom in constant struggle. Nobles rebelled when their privileges were threatened. Cities resisted imperial taxes. Even the Pope clashed with emperors, wielding the threat of excommunication like a sword. Every emperor faced the same haunting truth. The crown gave him glory, but not control. The history of medieval Germany is the history of this struggle. A sacred throne, weakened by division, and rulers forced to fight their own empire just to survive. The crown promised greatness, but in practice, it delivered endless challenges. Germany's Middle Ages were never peaceful. They were an endless battlefield, sometimes fought with swords, other times with crowns. Two great dynasties stood at the center of this storm, the Saxons and the Franconians. The Saxons had ruled first. Their line began with Henry the Fowler, the king who united scattered German tribes in the 10th century. His son, Otto the Great, built the Holy Roman Empire and placed Germany at the heart of Europe. To the Saxons, power was their birthright, but when their line weakened, the Franconians seized the throne. They weren't content to simply rule, they wanted to reshape the empire. Conrad II, the first Franconian emperor, claimed divine authority, insisting that his crown was given by God, not by the nobles who elected him. The Saxons never forgot, and they never forgave. What followed was a clash not just of families, but of visions. The Saxons saw Germany as a collection of strong tribal duchies, where each ruler held ancient rights. The Franconians dreamed of a centralized empire, where the emperor's word outweighed all others. These rivalries exploded into open feuds. Dukes plotted against emperors. Brothers turned on brothers. A single marriage could spark years of war. Castles were burned. Cities besieged. And the people, peasants, and townsfolk alike paid the price. At the heart of the conflict was one burning question. Who truly ruled medieval Germany? The bloodline of the Saxons? The rising power of the Franconians? Or the nobles who chose to back or betray whichever side suited them? Family ties offered no safety. Sons betrayed fathers. Cousins poisoned cousins. In one infamous case, an emperor's own relative conspired with the Pope to strip him of power. For centuries, the Saxons and Franconians traded blows, sometimes with armies, sometimes with assassins. And every time one dynasty seemed secure, the other returned from the shadows. Medieval Germany was not a kingdom of peace. It was a chessboard soaked in blood, where dynasties gambled everything for thrones that never truly belonged to them. And as the feuds grew, the empire itself began to crack. Medieval Germany's history was not just about crowns and ceremonies. It was about daggers in the dark, and trust shattered overnight. Assassination was a weapon as common as the sword. Kings rode through their lands knowing death could strike at any feast, any council, any prayer. One emperor was cut down by his own knights. Another was poisoned at a banquet meant to honor him. Nobles whispered alliances by day and sent killers by night. because in medieval Germany, loyalty was fragile. A friend today could be a traitor tomorrow. Broken alliances carved deep wounds into the empire. Dukes pledged support to the crown, only to switch sides when the pope or rival nobles offered more. Entire armies vanished from the battlefield because their commanders had been bought with gold or promises. The betrayal wasn't just political. It was personal. Brothers betrayed brothers. Sons betrayed fathers. One emperor was forced to march barefoot in the snow, begging forgiveness, not from his enemies, but from allies who had abandoned him, and every betrayal carried a heavy cost. Villages were burned to ash, peasants slaughtered, churches looted. The common people suffered, while their lords played their deadly game of power. Assassinations turned rulers into prisoners of fear. They surrounded themselves with guards. They ate cautiously, never sure if their wine was tainted. Every shadow, every candle flicker, could hide an assassin's blade. Even marriages meant to bind dynasties together ended in treachery. Brides were poisoned, heirs kidnapped, kings humiliated. A wedding could be the start of peace, or the spark of war. Germany became a land of suspicion. Trust was rare. Alliances were temporary. The empire itself was held together not by unity, but by fear. In this world, blood was the currency of power, and betrayal was the language every noble spoke fluently. The empire's crown, gleaming with jewels, seemed less a prize and more a curse, because in medieval Germany, to wear it was to live with a target on your back. In medieval Germany, the throne was never just a throne. It was a seat claimed not only by kings and emperors, but by the church itself. The Pope's shadow stretched across the empire. Every coronation needed the church's blessing. Without it, a crown was little more than metal and jewels. Papal influence was absolute. A single decree from Rome could strip a king of his authority, release nobles from their oaths, and turn loyal subjects into rebels overnight. The emperor might command armies, but the Pope commanded souls. This tension exploded in the investiture, controversy, one of the greatest power struggles of the Middle Ages. At its heart lay a single question: who had the right to appoint bishops and abbots, the emperor or the Pope? For emperors, bishops were not just men of faith. They were landholders, power brokers, commanders of wealth. To lose control over these appointments meant losing control of the empire itself. But the papacy refused to yield. The church declared that no mortal ruler could decide who wore the robes of God. Only Rome held that authority. The clash reached a dramatic peak with Emperor Henry IV. Defiant, he named his own bishops. The Pope retaliated, excommunicating him, casting him out of the Christian community, and freeing his vassals from loyalty. Henry's empire crumbled. Nobles abandoned him. Enemies circled like wolves. To survive, he made the most humiliating journey in medieval history. The emperor crossed the Alps, barefoot in the snow, dressed as a penitent. For 3 days, he stood outside the castle of Canossa, begging forgiveness from Pope Gregory VII, a king on his knees before the Pope. A moment that burned itself into the memory of Europe. Though Henry was eventually restored, the message was clear. The church could break an emperor as easily as it made one. The investiture battles raged for decades, tearing Germany apart, dividing nobles, and setting pope against king in a struggle with no true victor. In the end, the throne of Germany was not just threatened by rival dynasties. It was shackled by the hand of the church. Because in this age, to rule meant bowing at least in part, not to God alone, but to the men who claimed to speak for him. Medieval Germany was a land forged in steel and ruled by the sword. Knights were not just warriors. They were symbols of power, honor, and the brutal realities of war. Their presence defined the battlefield and the very structure of medieval life. The castles of Germany rose like jagged teeth across the landscape. Massive stone fortresses perched on cliffs and riverbanks, designed to withstand endless sieges. Each was a statement. This land is mine, and only death will take it from me. Sieges became the art of breaking wills. Weeks, months, sometimes years of starving defenders behind stone walls. Catapults hurled stones that shattered towers. Flaming arrows lit the night sky. And below the walls, men dug tunnels to bring the fortress crashing down. For the knights, this was their world. Clad in chainmail, later in plate armor, they thundered across the fields on horseback, lances lowered, banners flying. The clash of steel against steel echoed across valleys, turning farmland into graveyards. But knights were not only killers. They lived by a code of chivalry that it spoke of honor, loyalty, and service. A knight was bound to protect his lord, to defend the church, and to fight for justice. At least, that was the ideal. In reality, the code was often bent, twisted, or broken. Knights swore loyalty, then betrayed it. They pledged protection, yet plundered villages. Honor was preached in words, but tested in blood. Still, chivalry gave warfare a strange poetry. It turned brutal violence into ritual. Duels were fought not just for survival, but for pride, reputation, and glory. The songs of minstrels praised knights as noble heroes, even as peasants groaned beneath their boots. The knight was a contradiction, saint and sinner, protector and predator, warrior and poet. His castle was both refuge and prison. His sword, both shield and weapon. And through these men, the thrones of Germany were defended, challenged, and sometimes destroyed. Because in this world of endless rivalries, one truth was certain. Crowns were won and lost, not only in courts and churches, but on the battlefield, beneath banners soaked in blood. The empire's story was written not only in scrolls and decrees, but on battlefields, drenched in blood. The Saxon wars were among the first to shape medieval Germany. The Saxons, fierce, independent, and unwilling to bow, stood against the growing power of German kings. For decades, they resisted, fighting in forests, ambushing armies, refusing to yield their freedom. Kings marched against them again and again. Castles were burned. Villages turned to ash. Every victory came at a price. Every defeat sowed rebellion anew. But slowly, brutally, the Saxons were broken, drawn into the empire's grip. Their warriors either bent the knee or vanished from history. Yet, if the Saxon wars tested the empire's will, it was the Italian campaigns that tested its ambition. The emperors dreamed of more than Germany. They hungered for Rome itself, the old capital of the Caesars, the prize that could make them not just kings, but rulers of Christendom. But Italy was no easy conquest. Its cities were rich, powerful, and fiercely independent. Milan, Florence, Venice each resisted imperial control. And standing behind them was the Pope, determined to keep emperors in check. The campaigns dragged German armies south, across the Alps, into a land of constant war. Armies clashed on open plains. Knights stormed walled cities. And time after time, the empire bled men and gold in its quest for Italian dominance. The Lombard League, a coalition of Italian cities, rose to challenge the emperor's might. At battles like Legnano, German knights once thought invincible were shattered by militias fighting for their homes. The dream of ruling Italy became a nightmare. Emperors returned north weakened, their crowns tarnished, their enemies emboldened. For every step forward, they were dragged 2 steps back. Still, these battles carved legends. They proved the empire's reach, its courage, and its endless thirst for power. But they also revealed its fatal flaw, a throne divided between ambition at home and obsession abroad. The Saxon forests and the Italian plains told the same story, that thrones could not be secured by blood alone. because every victory bred new enemies, and every crown came with a heavier price. In the turbulent saga of medieval Germany, two emperors stood taller than the rest, men whose names echoed across centuries: Otto the Great and Frederick Barbarossa. Otto, the first known as Otto the Great, was the emperor who turned fragments into an empire. When he came to power in the 10th century, Germany was divided, unstable, threatened by outside enemies and restless lords. But Otto carried a vision of unity and the iron will to enforce it. He crushed rivals at home, breaking rebellious dukes and forcing them into submission. Then he turned outward, facing the greatest threat of his time, the Magyars. At the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, Otto led his knights into one of the most decisive victories in European history. The Magyar raiders, who had terrorized the continent for decades, were shattered. From that day on, Otto was not merely a king, he was the defender of Christendom. In 962, the Pope crowned him Holy Roman Emperor, a title that linked Germany to the legacy of Rome, a throne that promised not just power but immortality. Otto the Great had forged an empire from chaos, but nearly 2 centuries later, another giant would rise, Frederick I, known as Barbarossa. His red beard became a symbol of strength, his presence a legend. Barbarossa was not just a ruler, he was a force of nature. He sought to restore the glory of the empire, to make Germany and Italy bend to his will. With armies at his back, he crossed the Alps again and again, bringing fire and steel to rebellious Italian cities. He demanded obedience from nobles, loyalty from knights, and submission from the Pope himself. Barbarossa dreamed of an empire united under his hand, stretching from the North Sea to Rome, and for a time it seemed within his grasp. But resistance was relentless, and the empire's strength was not infinite. Still, Frederick Barbarossa's legacy endured. Legends whispered that he never truly died, that he sleeps beneath the mountains, waiting to return when Germany needs him most. Otto the Great and Frederick Barbarossa II, emperors separated by centuries, yet bound by ambition. One built the empire's foundation. The other tried to crown it with eternal glory. They were proof that in Germany, thrones were not given. They were seized, defended, and written into history with blood. The empire may have worn a crown, but beneath it, the ground was always shaking. Germany was never one kingdom. It was a collection of restless lands. And within those lands, rebellion smoldered like fire under the ashes. The nobles were the first to challenge imperial power. Dukes, counts, and princes ruled vast territories, their castles looming over valleys, their armies ready at a moment's call. They swore loyalty to the emperor, but only when it suited them. The moment a ruler grew weak, the nobles turned their swords inward. Civil wars tore through the empire. Rival dynasties raised banners against each other, each claiming the throne by blood or right. Families split apart, brothers fought brothers, and the empire became a battlefield of endless feuds. Every victory left scars. Every defeat bred vengeance. But rebellion was not limited to nobles. In the heart of Germany's towns and cities, another voice rose, the voice of the people. The medieval towns, growing wealthy through trade, began to demand their freedom. Merchants and guilds no longer wished to bow to lords who drained their profits with taxes and tolls. They formed councils, militias, and sometimes entire leagues to defend their rights. Revolts flared across the empire. In some towns, the bells rang out not for prayer but for uprising. Citizens armed themselves with pikes and crossbows, driving out noble garrisons, declaring independence. Some won charters, granting autonomy. Others were crushed, their leaders hanged in the market square as a warning to all. The emperor, caught between noble uprisings and town revolts, struggled to hold the empire together. His armies marched from one crisis to another, never at rest, always fighting shadows that grew faster than he could strike them down. Civil wars and rebellions weakened the throne more than foreign enemies ever could, because the true danger was not from outside invaders, but from within, from lords hungry for power and commoners who refused to stay silent. In medieval Germany, every crown was fragile, every throne a seat balanced on swords. And as long as ambition and defiance lived in the hearts of nobles and towns alike, the empire would never know peace. The Holy Roman Empire called itself an empire, but by the late Middle Ages, it was an empire in name more than in reality. The emperor's crown still glittered, but its power was fading fast. Fragmentation spread like cracks through stone. What began as a united dream under Otto and Barbarossa now splintered into hundreds of small realms. Every duke, every bishop, every count carved out his own domain, building castles, raising armies, and ruling as if he were king in miniature. The emperor was supposed to be the supreme ruler, but in truth, he was only first among equals, just another player in the dangerous game of power. When he demanded loyalty, the princes answered with conditions. When he called for armies, they sent excuses or worse, turned their soldiers against him. This shift of power was no accident. It was the result of centuries of battles, rebellions, and church interference. Each struggle chipped away at imperial authority, leaving the throne weaker. The princes stronger. The Golden Bull of 1356 sealed this reality. It declared that 7 powerful princes, the electors, had the right to choose the emperor. No longer was the crown passed by inheritance or papal blessing alone. Now it depended on the will of ambitious men, each ready to trade their votes for land, privileges, or gold. The empire had become a chessboard, and the emperor a piece constantly under threat. Princes bargained, towns demanded freedoms, and the pope's influence loomed over every decision. The once mighty imperial title was now a burden. A man might wear the crown of Charlemagne, but he ruled over a patchwork of territories that answered to him only when convenient. His decrees often reached no further than the walls of his own court. Fragmentation was more than political, it was cultural, even spiritual. Germany no longer thought of itself as one people, but as Bavarians, Saxons, Swabians, Franconians. Local pride mattered more than imperial unity. The princes, meanwhile, thrived. They taxed, judged, and ruled without interference. Some grew richer than kings, their palaces rivaling imperial courts. And so, the dream of a strong, united empire faded into myth. Germany's destiny would no longer be shaped by emperors alone, but by 100 rulers, each pulling the empire further apart. The story of medieval Germany is not just a tale of crowns and swords. It is a legacy that shaped Europe for centuries to come. Culturally, the empire left deep marks. Its castles still rise above rivers and hills, silent witnesses of battles long past. Its cathedrals, Cologne, Mainz, Speyer, still soar toward the heavens, reminders of an age when faith and power were inseparable. The knightly code, however flawed, inspired legends, poetry, and songs that still echo in German folklore. And the memory of emperors like Otto the Great and Frederick Barbarossa became part of the national identity, their names woven into the fabric of myth and history. Yet the empire's true legacy was political, both a lesson and a warning. It showed the danger of fragmentation, how too many princes, each guarding their own power, could strangle unity. It revealed how ambition and rivalry could tear apart even the strongest crown. And it proved that no throne, no matter how ancient or sacred, could survive without the loyalty of its people. The Holy Roman Empire became a paradox. It called itself eternal, yet it was fragile. It crowned emperors with grandeur, yet stripped them of real authority. It dreamed of unity under one ruler, but lived in endless division. These contradictions shaped the path of Europe. When Germany finally sought nationhood centuries later, it carried the scars of its medieval past, the habit of division, the struggle between rulers and people, the balance between power and freedom. But perhaps the greatest lesson of all lies in the throne itself. Every crown in medieval Germany was won by blood. Every victory was temporary. Every oath was fragile. And in the end, what endured was not the power of kings or the glory of nobles, but the resilience of the land, the culture, and the people who lived through centuries of chaos. The legacy of blood and thrones is a reminder that history is not made by crowns alone. It is shaped by ambition and betrayal, by faith and defiance, by victories and defeats that echo across time. And so, the story of medieval Germany still whispers to us today. That power fades, but its lessons remain. From bloodshed to memory, the story of medieval Germany does not end with its battles. It lives on in the echoes of its castles, in the legends of its emperors, and in the lessons carved by centuries of struggle. The empire's influence stretched far beyond its borders. Its fragmented model of power shaped the politics of Central Europe for generations. Its cathedrals inspired art and faith across Christendom. Its conflicts between church and crown still serve as cautionary tales for rulers who believe power is absolute. Even today, the Holy Roman Empire remains a symbol both of ambition and of warning. Ambition, because it dreamed of unity and greatness, of reviving Rome's eternal glory. Warning, because its divisions proved fatal, showing how power, when too widely scattered, can tear nations apart from within. The memory of emperors like Otto the Great, Frederick Barbarossa, and the countless lords who fought for blood and thrones still lingers in European identity. Their triumphs and failures became stepping stones in the long march toward modern states. Their wars laid the foundations for alliances and rivalries that shaped the destiny of Europe for centuries. But history does not stop here. Medieval Germany is only one chapter in the vast story of Europe. From its struggles rose new forces: Renaissance, Reformation, Revolution, each carrying the scars of the empire's legacy. Tale of Blood and Thrones reminds us that history is not distant, it is alive. It lives in the way nations are governed, in the symbols of power we still respect, and in the fragile balance between unity and division. And so, as we close this chapter, one question remains. What other hidden stories lie waiting in the past? What echoes of power, betrayal, and ambition still shape the world we live in today? Because history is not just about what has been, it is about what continues. And the story of medieval Germany is only the beginning. So, join us as we turn the page to the next chapter of history, where new empires rise, new battles rage, and the cycle of crowns, blood, and memory continues.